Well, hey everyone, my name is Mark Smith and I'm here with Baryic Hunter from Orange County Fire Authority. And Barric's agreed to sit down and talk a little bit about risk and how his perception of that based on your long years of experience. So we are socially distanced here. We've got 6 feet between us and we've both been vaccinated, right, twice. So we should be good for COVID. So Barric, why don't you tell us a little bit about just who you are, where you're from, how long you've been on the job.
Okay. First of all, thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here, that you selected me to be on your show. My name is Baryic Hunter. I'm a division chief for the Orange County Fire Authority. I've been in the position as a division chief for the last year. I've been in the fire service for 24 years now. I started out with Carlsbad Fire Department, San Diego City Fire Department. In the last 13 years, I've worked here for the Orange County Fire Authority.
Awesome. So let's just talk about maybe, let's just start with the basics. What is risk to you? How do you define it?
I define risk as something that exposes, whether it's your community, your department, your organization, your workforce, to danger. That's what risk is to me.
Yeah. So you talk about, there's values and then there's the danger to those values.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Have you always thought of yourself as a risk taker?
I didn't really look at myself as a risk taker until you look back. So when I look back on my career, I look at some of the things I did were maybe not the smartest thing, but definitely taking risks. And as you get older and mature, you move up in the fire department or fire service, you start looking back and your risk get a lot bigger because you're looking at it from a different vantage point. So when I was a firefighter, I didn't really view that as risk. But as I moved up in the organization, it was like, man, I took a lot of risk.
That's a really great perspective on that. I mean, how risky do you think your job is?
Well, as a firefighter, just being in the fire service, it's an inherently risky job with danger. My job right now, I didn't think it was as risky as it was when I was on the fire engine. But again, when you're serving at a different level, higher level, I have different risks that I'm exposed to in the organization that I look down on, where before when I rode on the fire engine as a firefighter, my risk was going into a structure fire or being on the side of the freeway with a traffic accident. As an engineer, driving and operating apparatus, as a captain, making sure that my crew was safe in the risks that we took. As you move up in the fire service and you get into a chief officer position, your risks continue to grow, where I'm looking at risk with the community, risks for our firefighters, risks for the organization, and I'm looking at a bigger picture of risks. Things that I would have never considered were risks when I was a firefighter, never. But there's a lot of different risks that I look at from a chief officer point of view or perspective.
So what do you consider as the biggest risk in the job now from this perspective that you have?
The biggest risk for me is our personnel, our workforce, is making sure that they're prepared, properly trained, and we support them to mitigate any incident that they go to. Just in the world has changed in the last year. We've seen with COVID, we've seen with civil disturbances, making sure that we properly prepare them, we educate them, we train them, and make sure that they have the equipment that they need to be successful. To me, that's our biggest risk is our workforce, and that's our biggest investment. We need to continue investing in them.
Yeah, which kind of already leads into, is there a difference, or was there a difference between what you thought was the risky part of the job and what you feel it actually is now?
With my current job, yes, for sure, yes. Where I thought the biggest risk was when I went to a large-scale incident and I took command of that incident, having to do the overall command and control, making sure I keep everybody safe. Because I know with our firefighters, they have families, and I know that for me, I don't want anybody to get hurt. I know it's an inherently risky job, but I thought that was going to be my biggest risk. We had the Blue Ridge fire, and I was the incident commander there for a couple days, and there were times where the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There were times where my stomach knotted up, just with the lack of resources and just the scale and magnitude of the incident, how fast it was moving. But with my job, that's part of the risk, but the other risk I look at are the organization, making sure that I keep the organization safe, valued by the community with the cities that we serve, and showing them the value that we have with all of the services that we provide, but making sure that we're there present for not only the cities, the communities, and making sure we continue to evolve and progress as a fire department.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that people outside of the job, let's say communities or, you know, the public, what, you know, do they have the same perception as you do about risk?
I don't think so. I think with the community, there's a lot of outreach and education that we do to the communities to inform them of what we do day in and day out as firefighters through social media with ourselves. I know our associations put out information to the public, but there's still just not the known of all the different variables, and the job is very diverse because there's so many different things that you can do in the fire service, and there's so many things that need to be done in the fire service to adequately prepare us for any emergency that we encounter, because that's a lot of people's first inclination is if there's an emergency, you call 911, the fire department's going to solve it and fix it. So we need to be very well versed and competent in what we do. Because when people call us, obviously it's on their worst day, but that's what they think of. I call 911, they're waiting for us at the firehouse, and as soon as the alarm goes off, they come to my house, but they don't understand the preparation that we do, the fire prevention, the community outreach, and all the different specialties that we offer here in the fire service.
Well, even the risks in the preparation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, with the fire service, it's changed where, you know, in order to make sure we're on top of our game, we do training that is close to as real life emergencies as we can do, where we do live fire training, we do wildland training. We're not burning wildland, but we're out there hiking hills and putting progressive hose lays in. With our medical emergencies, we train quarterly, and people need to maintain on their medical continuing education, is what we call it. But we're doing a lot of hands-on training, and the fire service, since I got started in '96, you can just see it evolve, but continuing to stay on pace to meet the demands of the communities.
So Barrick, how, you know, accurately do you think that people, you know, in your job perceive risk as it's changing dynamically real time? And I'm sure there's different answers for different levels, but just kind of what's your take on that?
I think based on how I learned about risk through experience, I think that's what's going on in the fire service, because, you know, as you come into the fire service, you go through the fire academy and they train you, and then they prepare you, and then you go through probation. But your goal is to be a competent firefighter, the best firefighter you can be, and you're just learning that position. And at that level, you're task oriented, so you're focused on tasks. It took me a good couple of years before, as a firefighter, I could see a little bit more of the bigger picture of things that are going on around me and things that I need to look for and at. And then I was able to mentor other firefighters. As I promoted, you can sit back a little bit as an engineer and you see a little bit more of a bigger picture. And that's when it kind of clicks on you to where, as a firefighter, you're running into a burning building. That's what you're trained to do. That's what you're going to do. You know, as people are running out, you're running in. So there's that risk, but you're not really seeing that.
It's not registering real time.
You're going
It
to
just
try to save
right.
somebody if somebody's still in the building, and you're going to put the fire out. You know, as you move up and you're able to take the big picture and look at the big picture, even as a fire captain, you're like, wow, that building's well involved. I know if we get some hose lines here and here, and you're seeing a little bit more. But back years ago when I was a firefighter, it was charge. We're going in, charge. And then as a chief officer, you see it even bigger, because now you're developing multiple plans in case plan A, B, C, and D don't work, or as we use in the fire service, the PACE acronym. So you're looking at it bigger, and you're identifying benchmarks to go, okay, that's not working. We need to swap into this. We need to swap onto that. So I would say with that question of risk, it's just like experience. You're developing experience to understand risk, identify risk, and put in that situational awareness to help you understand how to mitigate a lot of these risks. But that comes over time as you continue to develop the experience in your slide training.
Yeah, I mean, and that, just for people that may not have worked with that acronym, that PACE is primary, alternate, contingency, emergency, you know, trying to have as many contingencies as practical. Is there a time, like, when your risk profile just like changed drastically, like, and maybe even looking back on it, you didn't even know how close a call it was, maybe even real time until later, but just all of a sudden, you just were in over your head?
I can think of a couple times, but you don't realize it when
Yeah.
you're in the moment. Where I remember there was a fire when I was in Carlsbad, and it was a furniture warehouse. We were in there, and the AC unit dropped in front of us, and like right in front of me, and you could feel the air from it. Didn't know what it was. Kept trying to go forward.
Because you couldn't see.
Couldn't see it. Went
Right.
around it. And after the fire, it was like, wow, that was 4 feet away from falling on it. And you didn't realize it, and then you're just doing your thing, picking up hose, rolling up hose, or fires in San Diego City. When I worked there, the same thing. You don't realize it till, again, once you get that experience and you rise to that rank of a captain, you're like, wow, that was a pretty hairy time.
Yeah.
But again, when you're just so focused and you're charging, and maybe it's some of the youth and the adrenaline that kicks in when you're younger. But even as a captain, I try to be very aggressive with my crew, but at the same time, doing risk assessments, constantly reevaluating, where it's easier as a captain and a chief because you're sitting back. You're not at the tactical level, or when you're at the tactical level, you're trying to get the job done. But when you can sit back and constantly reevaluate and identify those benchmarks, it makes it it reduces that risk profile.
Yeah. Well, and you use the word benchmark. So how do you talk about risk in your job with other people?
With other people, it's just a matter of, on the fire ground, when you're talking about risk, when you're taking command and control of an incident, it's setting objectives for not only the crew that you're giving the assignment to, but the other crews that are going to come in and support that on the fire ground. They understand what their task is, what their objectives are. It's continuing to reassess the program. Every 15 minutes, we have an incident clock. So we're able to reassess that on incidents. For myself, it's every 5 minutes I'm looking at it. When somebody I keep a stopwatch in my vehicle. When somebody tells me something, I look at where it is on the stopwatch. Looking at what's going on with the environment, or benchmarks that I know over the past that I've seen in my slideshow, that if this happens, then this is definitely going to happen.
Right.
And that's one part of my job, and then the other part of my job with the risk that go on with whether it's programs I do for the organization. You're constantly reevaluating. So you plan it as best you can. I'm always looking at the ways that something can fail, and that to me is a risk assessment. So trying to shore that up so the program will be successful. Once you implement the program, you continue to monitor it, and you have to reevaluate it to see, do we need to update this? Do we need to make it better? Do we need to make it relevant? Because just like anything in life, things change.
Yeah.
With the current times in society.
Well, and in that, those are dynamic environments, you said, both at a tactical level, incident level, but also in a programmatic level. How do you, it's always, how do you balance that risk versus gain? In your mind, like what's your formula in your own mind to balance that risk versus gain?
A lot of the formula is just having that situational awareness and going through, trying to identify a lot of the risk and trying to put up measures to reduce the risk or mitigate the risk. Because you look at, like I said earlier, this job, it's inherently dangerous. Chief Alan Brunacini said, risk a lot to save a lot. Risk a little to save a little, risk nothing to save nothing. And you look at what he said, and it makes sense to people, and some people misinterpret it, but you look at our job, it's inherently dangerous. We go on the freeway every day for traffic accidents. That is very, very, very high risk, where we get hit by a car at any time. You're seeing more and more fire engines getting hit just while they're parked off to the side. You look at whether we go to a medical emergencies, there's inherent risk with that, especially with COVID-19 and other communicable diseases if we're not properly prepared. You look at the structure fires. So I think with a lot of what we do, we're always risking a lot. Every day we come to work, we're risking a lot because it's an inherently dangerous job.
Yeah. And you talked about like building up that slide tray, that slideshow, that database, of experience. One thing we're looking at is the impact of storytelling on that. What impact have stories had on you learning, you gaining experience?
Wow, it's had a lot. I know the fire service has changed in general, but when I got started in 1996, that's how you learned. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have YouTube. We weren't Googling things to see. So a lot of what you learned was through education training, and you would have a senior firefighter or captain tell you a story so you can relate it. When I got hired in San Diego City, I was fortunate enough to be put on a crew with very experienced crew, and they taught me a lot, just professionally as well as personally. But they would put me in situations that made me feel uncomfortable for me to learn. And that's how I learned, and then they would either tell a story before or after the incident. And it was
So just to make that
like connection, right?
Yeah,
So,
connection,
and
right.
that's how they do it. Nowadays, with firefighters, there's so much searching going on, whether it's on Google or YouTube. You can look up a flashover, where we could only, when I got started, see flashover on a video.
Right.
Now you can actually look at so many different types of different structures.
I mean, the stories are almost reality stories
It's
now,
exactly
right?
It's reality, where you're not really hearing a lot of people tell these stories, but you see a lot of the firefighters educating themselves on incidents or the flashover backdraft by looking up a lot of the information. And, you know, the fire service, our training's evolved. A lot of our training now is decentralized at a computer where we can put out the information through videos, through testing, through didactic. So there's a lot of different ways that we're training now versus storytelling. But like I said, when I got hired, that was it. It was kind of some training after the fire academy, but a lot of storytelling. And so you always wanted to get with that experienced firefighter or seasoned firefighter to show you how to do something or show you what you may potentially experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, we can now access so many stories.
Yes.
Yeah. So last thing, you know, in your mind, you know, we talk about a lot about safety policies and compliance, and there's a place for that. But in your mind, you know, what's the difference between working in order to be compliant versus working to, you know, increase these concepts of margin and resiliency and things like that?
So just, again, the fire service has changed, because when I got hired, this is a policy, you adhere to it, or you were gonna face severe discipline, or
Right.
potential severe discipline. And so they kept you in mind, where now things have changed, where for me, in my division, and even throughout our whole department, I would like a resilient workforce who can think for themselves, or I look at policy as a guideline.
Mm-hmm.
They are true guidelines to help us do our job effectively and efficiently. Those should be the foundation of everything, and we build upon it. So I hope that for a lot of the firefighters and crews that work for me, they understand that I understand policy, I understand that it's a guideline, but I want you to do the right thing to help this organization be effective and efficient in getting your job done. If there's a better way to do it and they violate policy, it's time for us to reevaluate our policies to make sure that they're current, to make sure something hasn't changed in the fire service. But I think by allowing the workforce to work within the policy, but know if they do need to step out of the policy, and it's a good reason, then we're going to reevaluate as an organization our policies. So that's how I view policies, and you know, I let my crews know when I talk to my chief officers about professionalism, making sure that they're competent at their job, and what we can do to support them as chief officers do their job. So one of that you look at is obviously policies, but you want them to be able to think not outside the box, but in a bigger box.
Mm-hmm.
And those policies or those guidelines
Yeah.
that kind of keep them in that box.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, Barrick, thank you. I know that was a quick blast, but I mean, I think a lot of interesting perspectives that you've gained, you know, not only from each position, but you've worked in a lot of different places as well and gotten things from each of them. So I really appreciate you joining us, and that is our Risk and Margin Talk with Baryic Hunter from OCFA. Thanks, man.
No, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, awesome.